With this movie we will show you how to create dynamic dependent dropdowns for small data sources. Small data sources contain up to 3,000 records. For small data sources it is better to use client-side filtering, as it is faster. Hi. My name is Ben Plessier and I am a fervent user of Wappler, just like most of you. I have two dropdowns on my page. One will display the jobs within the organization. The other will show the employees burdened with that job. When an employee has been selected, the area below the dropdowns will show the data related to the employee. This would be something that an HR department would want as part of their arsenal. But the application can also be used in other environments. The first dropdown could be used for motor car makes, while the second dropdown can be used for the models associated with the make. Categories and products also comes to mind. The principle remains the same in each case. After using old-fashioned pencil and paper to design the project, I usually start with the back end. The database structure occupies a great part in this process. Here I have a diagram showing the database structure for this project. This is a modified version of a sample database obtained from sqltutorial.org. I will leave the link below in case you want to follow along. The first dropdown is for jobs. Selecting a job results in showing the employees that perform the job in the second dropdown. Each job can give many employees, which gives us the relationship of one to many. Each employee has one manager who is also an employee, resulting in a many-to-one relationship. Each employee belongs to one department. Each department has one location, which in turn is situated in one country. I purposely highlight the many-to-one relationships because I will use this knowledge when creating the database queries later on. The first task here is to connect to the database. I do this under globals. This means that the database connection is available for all of our database actions. Here I enter the connection details. In your case you will need to enter the details of your database connection. The database manager shows that we have successfully connected to the database. Here we can see the tables that were shown in the database diagram. Under API, I create a folder for the server action. It is important to note that proper housekeeping is a requirement. In this example, I have just the single server action. If this was a real website, there would be a multitude of server actions, making tracking a difficult task if not properly organized. Inside the folder, I create a server action. I call it Employees Filtered. The first server action step is to create a database query for the first dropdown. I name it Jobs. Here I select the Jobs table. I select all of the columns, although selecting the ID and the title would have been better. The next database query is for the employees. However, this needs to be a filtered query. The filtering will happen on the front end and passed on to the back end. The input happens through a GET request. Under Input, GET, create a variable called filter. This is the variable that is used to filter the employees table. I can now go ahead and create the employees query. I have selected all of the columns. Under the Conditions tab, we filter the data based on job ID. The filter value is contained in the GET variable that was created. What I have created so far is sufficient to populate the dynamic dependent drop-down lists. It would also be enough to populate the detailed data area if it were not for the columns containing a numeric value instead of text for the job, manager, and department. The other tables also show ID columns that need to show test. This means that we need to create a number of single queries for job, manager, department, location, and country. I say single query because of the many-to-one relationships. An employee has only one job and one manager, etc. The next step is to create the manager single query. I select the employees table. After all, the manager is an employee of the organization. I select the field that I will be using. To filter the data to retrieve the manager, I select the Conditions tab. Here I select the manager employee ID to be the same as the employee manager ID. I hope that this makes sense. This relationship is illustrated by the circular binding in the diagram. The next step is to create a single query for the department. This time I select all of the columns. The department ID is used to filter on the employee department ID. Next comes the location single query. The filtering occurs using the location ID to be the same as the department location ID. Country is next. The single query is created with the country ID the same as location country ID. In hindsight, I could have made it a lot easier on myself had I chosen a simpler example. Never mind, Wappler does make it easy. The last single query is the job. This gets filtered on job ID being the same as employee job ID. We are done with the server actions. Don't forget to save the file. I can now close the panel in the tab. These are no longer needed. The time has come to prepare the front end of the application. For this, I have prepared an empty static Bootstrap 5-page. As usual, I add a container with a row and a column. Inside the column, I place a heading. After the row, I add another row, this time with 2 columns. Inside each of the columns, I add a select element. After the second row, I add a third row with an empty column. This column will be used to contain the employee details. I add a bit of spacing to better separate the sections. Going back to the select elements, I add a meaningful ID and remove unwanted static titles and values. I change the first title to Select a Job. Make sure to remove the value. Leaving the value empty will ensure that the static title will be the first to appear when the page is first opened. Then go to the second select element and repeat the process. The static title has been changed to Select an Employee. To bind the data to the select elements, I add a data source. I add a meaningful ID. The server action is the one that I created earlier on. If you remember, this server action is tied to a get variable called filter. Here I give the variable a value. This value comes from the value of the selected jobs select element. I can now bind the data to the select elements. For the jobs dropdown, I select the jobs step from the data source. The text field is tied to the job title field. The value field is tied to the job ID. The employees dropdown follows the same procedure. The data source is employees step from the data source. The text field concatenates the first name and last name. The value field is tied to the employee ID. To make sure that we have not created any errors, I will now test the creation. At this stage we have perfectly functioning dynamic dependent drop-down lists. The rest of the video goes on to show the complete application. For the data in the last column, I need to create a data source that contains the relevant data for the selected employee. For this, I add a data view component. I give the data view a recognizable ID. For the data source, I select Employees from Server Connect. For the filter, I choose Employee ID to be the same as the value from the selected employee from the Employees drop-down list. I am now ready to populate the data area. For this I choose Generators and Bootstrap 5 table. To populate the table, I choose the Data View data source. I choose a vertical table which will give me the headings on the left and the data on the right. I make the table responsive and small so that it takes up less space. At this stage that does not show the data in the data view area. The reason is that no employee has been selected to show the data. To overcome this, I will turn Live View on. I go ahead and select a job and an employee. We now see the data associated with the employee. I turn Live View off so that I can select the elements on my canvas. For the employee heading, I add ID. While here, I change the width of the heading to 25%. This will affect the width of all of the headings and keep it the same for each data set. The second heading is changed to full name. To the cell I add the last name. The last name row is no longer relevant, so it is deleted. The email and phone number rows are as I want them. The hire date needs to be correctly formatted. The year is most likely the most important. So I show that first, followed by the month and the day. The job number needs to be replaced by the title of the job. I get this from Server Connect under Jobs. The salary needs to show as a monetary amount. This requires a little workaround for the current version of Wappler. First, the number is converted into a number. Then it is formatted as currency. I then remove the number conversion step. My apologies for this. But this is the only way for now. The manager ID is replaced by their name. The name is obtained from Server Connect under Manager. Here I add both first name and last name. Before I add the department name, I repeat the row 3 times. This is for the address, city, and country. I will now speed the video up. The procedure for each row mimics the procedures that you have already seen. I also hold my mouth while you watch on. I save the page and turn live view on so that I can test the creation. Here I already see a drawback. The data area shows unwanted data. I will fix this. But first see what happens when I choose an employee. That part works like a charm. To fix the data area, I choose the responsive table and go down to dynamic attributes. Here I choose the display and show options. For the value, I choose employee ID. This means that, if employee ID has a value, the responsive table will show. Otherwise it remains hidden. I refresh the page, which is still in live view, and repeat the process of selecting an employee. As we can see, it now works as intended. This video has shown more than just the dynamic drop-down lists. My intention was to show a complete application. There is still more that can be done, like applying styling and catering for other screen sizes. If you have queries regarding this how-to, please note them below and I will try to accommodate them. In the meantime, I hope that this video has been of use. I will be producing more videos like this. So, subscribe and be notified of new productions. Thank you for watching.